Thank you for being with me here today, Esteban and Anna. My research question started with the stimulus material of the Norman Rockwell painting, and Americans are patriotic, honest, lazy, and selfish according to Americans. In the Norman Rockwell painting, we see the struggle that it was to transition from segregation to a new era where people were accepted regardless of their demographic, and we had the civil rights movement. And then in Americans are patriotic, honest, lazy, and selfish according to Americans, we see how through generations people have different perspectives. And this led me to the overarching question: to what extent does demographically based voting impact the voice of African Americans in America today? And the impact of this is, if demographically based voting is impeding the ability of African Americans to express their beliefs in elections, they're not really getting the voice that they deserve, the voice that the civil rights movement was supposed to ensure for them. The answer I came to was that despite its success in the past, demographic voting in the African American community was antiquated, limits individual expression, and generalizes African Americans. I also believe that some actions should be taken to diminish this effect. Starting with the counter here is a lot of people look toward the historical dissuasion, where groups like the NAACP have encouraged African Americans to vote together and to focus on the single platform of civil rights. And that's reflected in the Gallup polls, where through the years you see that in no election since the Civil Rights Act passed have African Americans voted with more than 12% for the conservative candidate. But when we look at America today, we can't be like that. We can't look at a single platform issue. We have to look at other issues like gun rights and abortion and social and economic policies that affect all of America, not just African Americans, or not just catering toward a certain demographic. I also found through research through the Washington Post that African Americans are 45% conservative and 47% liberal, but because of the influence, the group think of all of them voting the same way, in the election of 2012, 93% voted for the Democratic candidate, not necessarily because they believed in all his policies, but because they felt obliged to vote that way. American Thinker also notes that the voice of civil rights in many cases triumphs over any issues that African Americans favor, and that they'll look toward the party's positions on civil rights more than look toward it on any other issue. I also want to take a moment to look at the influence that groupthink has and how it has, how others view African Americans because of it. Voter unanimity lowers the appraisal of the black vote worth and black standing, according to Hot Air. It also says that this groupthink discourages blacks from being political leaders because they don't feel like the issues that concern them are issues that concern all of America. According to some Republicans like Jindal, they also feel that the way that they're viewed, because they only vote for this, makes them seem selfish or extremely liberal, when in fact African Americans are a demographic that are deeply contested on many issues. And it's also, when we look at groupthink, important to remember that when it comes to a solution to this issue, that people thinking the same way, people having this political identity, is something that's difficult to change and is very attractive to people. I hope this makes it clear that demographic voting has a negative impact on America and on the African American community today. Before I offer what I believe could be a solution, I want to address some of the limitations of my research. First of all, it was very hard to find unbiased sources when, especially media, since this is subjective information, you have extreme lefts and extreme rights. So to come to conclusions I did on demographic voting involved a lot of research-based stuff and looking through opinion articles that obviously aren't as credible or relevant as a lot of qualitative data would be. And it's also important to remember that this has relative value to a lot of people, where some people would say that it's all right that African Americans are doing this because that's their most important issue, while others would say that it's unjust or it's a limit on the democratic expression of certain African Americans. So the only solution I can offer to this is that we really need to work together as a society. We need to encourage people to be more open with their political expression and be more kind to those who choose to deviate from the political identity that's expected from them. In the last election, we saw all this backlash against voters who were dissonant toward their certain group or demographic, and we really need to take steps to go against this so that every black vote can be heard and every voice in America can be heard equally.
Cool. Thank you, Dalton. Are you ready for your questions?
I am.
Okay. What information did you need that you weren't able to find or locate? How did you go about trying to find this information?
I really wasn't able to find anything on. Can you repeat the question?
What information were you not able to find or locate, and how did you go about trying to find it?
I really felt that I was able to find a lot of what I needed to find, like statistically. I mean, there was that consistency in the way they were voting. I might have preferred to see more testimonials or see more appeals to how like both parties were looking after African American interests. And while I found that in stuff by the DNC and RNC, it really wasn't as concrete as I would have liked, or I wasn't able to make that a claim that both parties offered the same things to African Americans.
What might be the real-world implications or consequences of your findings, and what are the implications to your community?
I mean, just in a democratic institution that we have today in America, within Indiana, and I mean even local government, everyone's voice it should be heard, and that's just as a democratic principle. If we're having people who feel pressured to vote a certain way because they're a certain race, because they belong to some group, then it really challenges how our government's functioning.
Cool. Thanks, Dalton.